It's 1906. After 6 days at sea, you have finally arrived at Ellis Island, the busiest immigration processing station in the United States during the early 20th century. After making your way through long lines, answering questions, paying fees, and passing a medical exam, you step out onto the streets of New York. For years, you've heard stories about the United States, a nation of immigrants that offers a chance at a new and better life. Your journey to America is over, but you have only taken the first step on the path to citizenship. In previous lessons, we primarily focused on policies and events related to immigration. However, this lesson is about citizenship. Our essential question for this lesson is, historically, who could be a citizen of the United States? Our guiding questions are, what are the 3 basic ways someone can become a citizen? What qualifications, criteria, and requirements were historically used to restrict access to citizenship? But before we begin, I want to clarify some key points. First, when talking about U.S. history, it is important to recognize that not all people who wanted to become citizens or who were denied citizenship were immigrants. Second, not all immigrants or U.S. residents wanted to become citizens. Finally, the restrictions on who could immigrate to the United States were not necessarily the same as the restrictions on who could become a citizen. Without further ado, let's get started! Historically speaking, there are 3 basic types of citizenship. The first is jus sanguinis, or right of blood, which means that citizenship is inherited from one's parents. So if someone is born abroad, they are eligible for citizenship if at least one of their parents is a U.S. citizen. The second is jus soli, or right of soil. This is commonly referred to as birthright citizenship, which means that citizenship is granted based on place of birth. The third is naturalization, which is the process by which people gain citizenship by swearing an oath of loyalty. Pause here to respond to the first guiding question in your lesson PDF. For this lesson, we will focus on birthright citizenship and naturalization because they are most common and most significant within U.S. history. To answer the second guiding question, let's examine some specific factors and qualifications that were historically used to restrict access to citizenship. The United States formally recognized birthright citizenship when the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. This change was significant because it established that a person born in the United States is a citizen, regardless of race, ethnicity, or social class. However, birthright citizenship faced some challenges. One such challenge was the Chinese Exclusion Act. This is Wong Kim Ark. He was an American-born son of 2 Chinese immigrants. He was denied citizenship because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prevented Chinese people from becoming U.S. citizens. Wong sued, alleging that he was a citizen under the 14th Amendment because he had been born in the U.S. His case went to the Supreme Court, and in 1898, the Supreme Court ruled that the Chinese Exclusion Act could not be used to deny Wong citizenship because he was a citizen by birth. Pause here to add to the section of the chart for the Chinese Exclusion Act in your lesson PDF. Indigenous people also faced challenges when it came to citizenship. Why? Because the 14th Amendment was not generally interpreted to include tribal citizens, or people who are citizens of an indigenous tribe. Consequently, tribal citizenship made indigenous people born within the U.S. ineligible for American citizenship. It wasn't until the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 that U.S. citizenship was granted to all indigenous people and tribal citizens born within the United States. Pause here to add to the section of the chart for tribal citizenship in your lesson PDF. What about those not born in the United States? For those people, the first challenge was the immigration process. But let's assume that someone has already immigrated to the United States. What additional barriers might prevent them from becoming a naturalized citizen? As you previously learned, the terms race, ethnicity, and national origin were inconsistently used and not clearly defined. This was an issue because, as you already know, being white was one of the first established citizenship requirements. However, who has been considered white in the United States has continuously evolved over time. In the 19th century, the pseudoscience of phrenology emerged, which claimed that a person's race, intelligence, and character could be scientifically determined by examining head shape and facial features. Pseudoscience refers to a collection of beliefs or practices incorrectly regarded as being based on science and reason. Phrenology was used to support the false claim that race is a biological and scientific phenomenon. This allowed policymakers to argue that there was a scientific basis for using race to exclude groups of immigrants. But in reality, race is a vague, subjective, and unscientific system of categorizing people that is continuously evolving and changing. Pause here to add to the section of the chart for race and pseudoscience in your lesson PDF. The Naturalization Act of 1790 required a person to have been a resident of the U.S. for 3 years before they could apply for citizenship. In 1795, that was increased to 5 years. In 1798, it was increased again from 5 to 14 years, but was dropped back down to 5 years in 1802. In 1850, the Know-Nothings, a nativist and anti-immigrant political party, campaigned to increase the residency period to 21 years, but ultimately failed. Over time, residency requirements continued to fluctuate. At some point, residency requirements were influenced by other factors like nationality or age. Pause here to add to the residency requirements section of the chart in your lesson PDF. The idea of a citizenship test started with an 1802 law requiring candidates for naturalization to demonstrate an attachment to principles of the Constitution. Because the courts had the authority to grant or deny citizenship, how this was demonstrated varied from state to state, court to court, and judge to judge. Some judges would quiz candidates on U.S. history, government, and other topics they believed would demonstrate attachment to the Constitution's principles. Beginning in 1906, when citizenship tests were first standardized, test administrators were still able to choose which questions to ask. It wasn't until the 1930s that intentionally tricky or deceptive questions were removed. One such example was, how many stars are on the quarter? In case you're wondering what the answer is, it depends on the quarter. Pause here to add to the citizenship test section of the chart in your lesson PDF. The good character requirement was first introduced in 1790. In 1795, this was changed to good moral character, which remains a requirement today. But what does it mean? Well, generally, the good moral character requirement is used to disqualify people previously convicted of crimes. Historically, it was also used to disqualify people who were deemed socially or politically unfit. For example, between the late 19th century and World War I, this phrase was used to disqualify political radicals, though that term was also undefined. Generally speaking, it was, and still is, up to the courts to determine whether someone meets the good moral character requirement. How do courts decide? Well, in most cases, judges review sworn statements by witnesses who can attest to the candidate's good moral character. A judge might also question the candidate or initiate an investigation by immigration officials. Pause here to add to the good moral character section of the chart in your lesson PDF. The last step is swearing the oath of allegiance, which is an oath required to be taken by every immigrant who wishes to become a citizen. This is mostly a formality, but a requirement nonetheless. The first official standardized oath was created in 1929, and it has undergone a few changes since then. Today, naturalization candidates must still pass a citizenship test, meet residency requirements, and demonstrate good moral character. However, the path to citizenship varies more widely today and is influenced by several factors, including age, family ties, country of origin, education, and employment. Also, remember that for many, this is all in addition to the immigration process. In the lesson PDF, you'll examine some political cartoons that present different perspectives on naturalization in the late 19th century. Okay, until next time, keep making history!